All right, what's up, brother? Are you ready for another episode of CrossCurrent?
Yes,
we're ready to rock and roll. Now, here we go. Today is a big time day. Worldwide action going on. Now, I'm going to hit you with a couple of different topics that have come up. We've got a major protest in London, England for freedom of speech.
Right.
We got some kind of prayer rally in Washington, D.C.
Right.
We have turmoil and conflict rising around cultures and Christianity and Islam and what's a nation, what's freedom of speech, what can we say, what can we not? And then right in the wake of all of that, a tragic shooting that takes place in San Diego as two teenage boys go into a mosque and take the lives of, what's the number at this point? 3 people were killed, or not including the 2 who took their own lives.
The two
Tragedy. So I'm going to put those in front of you. We're going to talk a little bit. I want to ask you some questions. What do Christians do? There's real conflict ideologically between the two. There's real cultural questions, but is violence the answer? Is that the direction to go? All right, Ray, are you ready? We're going to start off with the UK protest. And we have a clip from I think it's the Prime Minister of England.
Yes.
So he's basically Keir Starmer, right?
Yes.
And he's going to come out. Before the protest happens, he's going to categorize all these folks in a certain way.
Right.
Tomorrow's march in London is a reminder of what we're up against in the battle of our values. The organisers, including convicted thugs and racists, are peddling hatred and division, plain and simple. Their goal is to convince people that Britain's problems are caused by those living alongside them. But that is not the Britain that I know. This is a country built on decency, fairness and respect. A country that is at its best when people from different backgrounds come together in common purpose. This is our country, with a majority who share those values, a majority who may not always be as loud, but must always define who we are. So, my government will not stand in the way of peaceful protest, but we will act decisively against hatred. We will use the full force of the law when that hatred manifests as violence. And we will ban those coming into the UK who seek to stir it up, as we have done already. Because this country belongs to all of us. And I will not tolerate anyone who seeks to stand in the way of that.
So, if you're looking from the outside, which largely we are, what's your take on what the Prime Minister said there? Then I'll give you my take, and then we'll frame it up into a bigger, clearer context.
Right. So he automatically, right? This is before. So he knows who's going to be there, right?
He does.
What's his name? Tommy, is it Tommy Robinson?
That's correct.
Tommy Robinson. So without mentioning him, he categorizes him as convicted thugs, racist, peddling hatred and division.
Yeah.
Right. So automatically he's putting, his opinion, the Prime Minister of Britain, calling these people
sounds like terrible people.
Thugs, racists,
terrible people.
Peddling hatred and division.
Must be terrible.
So he automatically says the government stance is against them.
Yes.
Yeah. So he's pitting himself, his political power against them, right?
That's what it seems like for me, even from across the pond.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, you just listen to him.
And what you got at the very end of that, he said that, this is not the England that we are. There's many other people with values, that people coming together is what we want, so on and so forth. And so to ensure that no violence occurs, we've already banned people from coming into the country and participating. Did you catch that last line?
Yeah. And, he says this country is built on decency, fairness, and respect, meaning they're not decent, they're not fair, and they're disrespectful.
Let me show you what it is that the guys who are leading this thing that Keir Starmer oppose, okay?
Out in the streets of London just the other week. What revolution are you leading?
We're leading a cultural revolution. In fact, a cultural revolution in Great Britain, but a counter-revolution. It's a counter-revolution because there's been a globalist revolution for the last 2 decades across the West. They've taken power through censorship. They've attacked the family. They've attacked Christianity. They've attacked culture. They've broke us down. And now we're leading a counter-revolution to that. We want to get back to where we were. We want to get back to our British values, back to our family values. 20 years. the British public have been intimidated into silence. It's not just the British public. It's every European nation, every Western nation. People have been scared to speak. Scared because you lose your job, scared because of cancel culture, scared because of government-funded organisations like Antifa and groups like this violently attack you. So all of these things have played a part in managing to silence what I'd say is the most fiercest nation of men on the planet. I don't want individual, innocent, decent Muslims to be worried or feel fear, but they have to understand the fear that we feel. We feel a fear for our country. We feel a fear for the future. We feel a fear for our daughters. And we're sick to death of it, to be honest.
What's your take on that? You may not know much about Tommy Robinson. He's the one classified as a thug and a racist by Kiara Starmer. You probably can guess why to a certain degree. What's your sense on where he's coming from just from watching that clip?
You see, you need to look at history, because remember, back, the Ottoman Empire and those empires that took control all the way up to Spain, So they infiltrated, right? So to be honest, this is nothing new. This is nothing new. Now, I mean, we could talk crusades and how we both, right, on both sides.
You definitely would have to do that.
There has
huge
been
piece of the puzzle.
Atrocities made on both sides, Muslims and I don't want to say Christians. I actually want to say Catholics, right? Because at point in time, Catholics were monopolized.
But at the time of the Crusades, there was no Protestants.
Yeah,
that was the Christian church in the West. You had the Orthodox in the Western church.
I think, I'm not in this guy's mind, right? But that's kind of what he's seeing. He's seeing that the Muslim population is growing because the governments are in fear, of going against that growth because they may think that they're more violent if they don't get their ways, where Christians have been violent, right? Because there was a revolution up in the UK back in the day by Christians, right? You have to look at history. History repeats itself, and in different ways, right? But it does repeat itself. So I think this guy Robinson is trying to combat that, right?
So Tommy Robinson, because I ran into this about 6 months ago and did a little background. He grew up in an English village that was very diverse, people from all different backgrounds. And suddenly, as the government began to bring in immigrants in England, largely almost like the U.S. did, they brought in big, huge droves, and his own town began to change dramatically as many of the immigrants coming over were Muslim. And suddenly, within his own town, he had a very different cultural and community vibe between the Muslim groups on the one side of town and the English folks, black, white, brown, whatever, on the other side of town. And there began to be some conflict. And some of the most challenging things was the way that young girls were treated and things like this. Very troubling, very concerning to him. He began to speak against it and even act against it, sometimes violently. That's where the name thug comes from in that young period of time. And now they're continuing to raise the question with these immigrants that are coming from non-English backgrounds and therefore non-Western civilization European backgrounds. The argument is, and it's not an argument, just a fact, they've got a different tradition, culture, value set, and there's a conflict that happens here when what one group values is very different than what the other group values. And suddenly, what happens? And I think that the question that if you were to read the group that came out in protest for the free speech rally in England this past weekend, the majority of them are arguing our culture, our country is being changed from within, and we want to push back on some of this because we believe our values are important and wonderful and great, and this is part of the conversation. And yet, the prime minister comes out and calls them thugs and racists. Right. Do you think that that's a fair treatment? If those are the ideas, now if there's something else, the things to be questioned, you can always question. What's your take?
Right. So I think the main challenge we have here, right? There are certain groups, and I'm going to generalize, but there are certain groups that refuse to assimilate to the country that they have been invited in. So when that subculture refuses to assimilate to the culture at large, what they start doing, and unfortunately, the government has never really been good in managing this, right? I mean, we saw it back in, World War II when we started, and here in the United States, right? What we did to the Japanese population.
Internment camps in California.
Camps,
I've driven by them.
So you have UK inviting these immigrants in and relocating them in specific areas, in containment areas. So they're living amongst themselves. What they're doing, importing their culture into the UK and refusing to assimilate.
And part of the conversation there in England is that those Muslim enclaves, which to this point sometimes are half a city or huge areas, they're not functioning under English law primarily. They're moving into a Sharia law situation where the imams are the ones that make the decision. The value sets are there. Some of the things that, and I just hate to tell you, there's the way that some of these Muslim men are treating women. You've got what were called rape gangs going on there, things that are very, very troubling that we're not going to get all the way into, but the English recognize that very prominently and they're stepping to the forefront. So you have this big question, culture, values, the shift. What do you do? How does the government treat it? Let me swing you one other place, okay? And in our own country, we're having some questions like that begin to surface.
Yeah.
This past weekend.
Dearborn, Michigan.
Yeah, okay.
Dearborn, Michigan.
Go ahead.
You have Minnesota, the Somali population in Minnesota. So within our own country, we have pockets of subcultures that to some level refuse to assimilate.
Yes, and I've seen interviews with those folks that say, hey, this is who we are, this is what we're about. And the challenge that you raised earlier, Ray, was if you don't want to assimilate, then as a country looking at the immigrant who comes, whether legally or illegally, what do you do in that situation?
Right.
And so is it a surprise that those who are currently present say, wait a minute, what's going on here? How are we going to manage that? That doesn't seem to be a question that shouldn't be asked. It seems like it's an inevitable question that's going to come. I mean, wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, and I do agree, and there's going to be conflict, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
So it's very hard to govern from a neutral position. You have to govern from a neutral position. You cannot use your person. As a governing body, you can't pick sides. It's like when as a parent, you have two kids fighting. You can't say, you know what, little Johnny, you're right, and Tommy, you're wrong. Go to your room.
Let me push back, okay?
Yeah.
This protest happened right down by Westminster, okay? And the buildings that are there.
You're more historically
I am a little bit more, but I'm going to hit you with it.
Yeah.
The Westminster, listen, the Westminster Standards, which are probably the most significant Protestant Reformed confession of faith, was penned right in that area. So there's many churches, of which our church is one, that affirm those Westminster Standards about sound biblical doctrine. And so my point, just piece of pushback is here. That's the heart, like the cradle of Protestant Reformed Christianity was drafted over a course of 5, 6, 7 years by pastors and elders, the Westminster Divines, right there on the streets, in which those people were protesting to ask the question, wait a minute, as we're importing Muslim immigrants legally or illegally, and they're pushing for Sharia law, we are England. And we are a nation that was Christian. First Catholic, then through King Henry to Anglican, wrestled with Protestant Reform things, back to Anglicanism. Wait a minute, this is not who we are. And now, so you're saying you got to govern neutrally, but what they're saying is we've never been neutral. We're a Christian nation. And I've heard people ask the question, if you and I were to go to insert Muslim country here and then push for Christianity en masse, how?
Crushed, hanged, shot. I mean, they're hanging people in Iran.
But neutral.
I get that, but
would their perspective be neutral there?
No.
Or would they say, wait a minute, we're not a Christian nation,
But if you look at Christian values and morals and the example of Jesus Christ, right, we are to invite strangers. And that's the pushback these non-Christian groups say. Oh, Jesus, he was a immigrant. He said he accepted strangers. Why can't you, right? So we being a biblical based Christian, You have to, right, accept strangers in. You have to have that hospitality.
So when the stranger comes into your house that you accept in your house and then takes over your own house and redefines everything is that what a stranger invited in should?
That's why I say we need to, the people who are in the governing bodies have to be neutral. The laws that are in place, enforce them equally.
But that's not how it goes.
Well, that's
and part
the problem.
of the challenge in England is as the numbers of the Muslim population rise, the English population, which is declining, Muslims have many more kids, they see that suddenly it's going to go, 60-40, 55-55, 50-50, or not what, 55-45, and then suddenly, boom, they're going to be outnumbered. And what's going to happen then?
The problem you have with people like Starmer, and we see that in this country, hey, look at New York, we see that in this country as well. They crave political power more than anything else, I would have to say. So they're fearful of losing that political power if they force that assimilation into the subculture. They fear that subculture is already at a level powerful enough that they can vote them out of office.
So these issues are not held in England alone.
No,
part of the thing that Tommy Robinson talks about is, hey, U.S. people, this is coming to your doorstep next. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so there's many folks in the U.S. that are aware of the shifts culturally, that are looking across the pond and saying, what they're facing now, the U.S. is going to have to begin to think through very soon. Yeah. You've already pointed to Dearborn, Michigan, and other places where majority Muslim populations are redefining the city, the culture of those cities, even the laws of those cities, the feel of those cities. And so that's not an unreal question to ask. We're going to add two more things in the equation to get your take. So just this past Sunday, there in the Capitol, there was some kind of Christian thing that was led in the middle of the Capitol, which is not unrelated to the tensions here between Muslim, Christian, the culture shifting, what's going on. But I got a little clip from it. Let's see what's going on. And then we're swinging the same conversation over to the States because some of the same questions are coming up.
Right. You have prominent cabinet members, including the president. The president read from 2nd Chronicles. You had the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of War, come out also saying that, George Washington, prayed for the country. So yeah, they definitely did not hide the fact that they promote Christianity, not only in their personal lives, but in government and governing as well.
Thousands gathered Sunday on the National Mall for a day of prayer, worship, and patriotic tributes at Rededicate 250. The faith-based celebration featuring top Trump administration officials, religious leaders, musicians, and supporters from across the country all focus on a national rededication to faith and freedom. The president delivering a video message from the White House, reading from the Old Testament as part of the 9-hour event. House Speaker Mike Johnson leading a formal prayer rededicating the country as one nation under God.
Today, here, Lord, in this 250th year of American independence, we hereby rededicate the United States of America as one nation under God.
Crowds stretch across the National Mall, the stage framed by the Washington Monument, as worship music and prayers continue throughout the day. Vice President J.D. Vance tying America's founding directly to faith and religion.
John Adams famously said that our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. It was obvious to the founders that our faith was the ground upon which America stands. It was our very foundation as a people.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio telling attendees the nation's identity has long been connected to faith.
This is who we are. It is who we have always been. America is still a young nation measured against the record of history. And from the beginning, we have carried the belief that our country represents something new in the world. But the soul of our nation has always been rooted in an ancient faith.
Secretary of War Pete Hegseth urging Americans to pray for the country's future. He referenced the famous painting The Prayer at Valley Forge, which shows George Washington praying at one of the darkest times in the American Revolution.
Let us pray without ceasing. Let us pray for our nation on bended knee. And let us ask our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, as Washington did on that momentous day. So help us God.
Okay, so we watched the clip, and basically what you see is coming into America, you got some of those same issues.
Right.
You know, as people wrestling. Hey, America was a Christian nation. What's going on? We've got to go back. We've got to push back. And suddenly you've got some of the same conflict in the States between Muslim and Christian, between what you might call a more progressive cultural set of values,
Right.
maybe even identify LGBTQ, that whole kind of cultural push. And you've got folks that are saying, wait a minute, what's happening? The sands are shifting beneath our feet. We're not happy about it. What do we do?
Right.
So we've talked about this here before. What do you say about a place like America that did truthfully have a Christian foundation, but certainly is not necessarily in that boat today? Now, let me hit you with this thing. When I was watching the rally in England, I saw they were carrying these crosses. It's the
Right.
Saint
St. George, I
St.
think it
George
was,
cross,
yeah.
and they were using that as a symbol. And I
Right.
saw one lady holding up the cross and walking forward, and she was being interviewed, and they're saying, "What do you? Christ is King. Christ is King." Well, what do you think of Starmer? Well, Starmer's a bleep 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 bleep, and I'm thinking, wow, that's interesting. So there's this weird interplay between so-called Christianity and political anger and cultural identity.
Right.
And yet here in the States, the prayer rally, often you see the same kind of a mix. You might have real Christians that are there, but then you also have kind of cultural people
Right.
who use Christianity as kind of a litmus test stone. I don't know what to call it here to bounce off of. What's your thoughts on that?
This is the problem, man, because you can't weaponize Christianity. And I think that's what a lot of these people do. You know, and I'm just looking at one of the headlines of one of these articles, and it talks about this prayer rally pushed narrative of Christian nationalism.
Oh, that's the same words popped up before.
Yeah. So that's the problem. That's why I say people who are in political positions need to govern neutrally. Because what happens is if someone picks up that Christian banner, right, picks it up, and let's just, I mean, Trump does it, right? He picks up that Christian banner and he says, you know, all these things. And now the hate that people have for the individual transfers over to Christianity. So now people hate Christianity. Why? Because one individual, in this case, let's say Trump, because he's the president. Now that transfer, that the hate that they have for that president transfers over to Christianity. Now, I'm not saying, right, and we could talk about this, right? I'm not saying that if you get voted into political office, you shouldn't leave your Christianity behind, but you do need to govern neutrally. Christian value, let me not even say that. Biblical values and morals supersede any other religion in kindness and love. I mean, it tells you, right? Love your neighbor as you love yourself. Jesus said that's the second most important commandment. So in there alone, right, you are to sacrifice for others. That in those acts of love, right, that subculture will get to know not only you, but Christ. And that's the difference between Christianity and the others. Christianity is not picking up a cross and marching in protest against other people. That's not Christianity. Christianity is, oh, you're from XYZ Muslim country? Hey, come into my house. Let's have a meal. Let's talk. Let's get to know each other. That's Christianity. Oh, your car broke down? Hey, I know this mechanic. Oh, your car broke down? I know how to fix that. That's Christianity. Christianity is not protesting with crosses and saying, Jesus is king. Jesus didn't say, I'm king. He didn't say that. He could have. He could have. He could have gone. He could have went down Jerusalem and be like, I'm king. Boom, you're dead. Boom, you're dead. Boom, you're dead. You're good. Come over here. He could have done that, but he didn't.
So what I hear you saying is there's this challenge for the Christian. how do you live in society? How do you promote Christ? How do you proclaim the gospel? Certainly you live it out. You also preach and share the story of Christ. And you do that, as you talk about, in a way that's gracious and kind and merciful. Jesus talks about being struck on one cheek, turn the other also. If they've persecuted me, they're going to persecute you as well, and endure that persecution, right, for the sake of the other. And so you're pushing on that piece. You're leaning into that element of our call as believers. And yet there are things that happen in society, in the public world. Christians do get to weigh in, correct? And they use their faith and their understanding of morality that comes from their belief of who God is and what he commands to give them insight into how to act. And then question becomes, well, what's the laws of the land going to look like? You know, or what's the culture of the land going to look like?
Right.
And I guess what happens, Ray, is when you have a unique moment, maybe like you see in the UK, what you see that pops up in the States more and more, and maybe more and more in the future, that push between a Muslim perspective and a Christian perspective, you really are left with some fundamental questions to ask, not just about privately who you're going to be as a person, but publicly, who is your community going to be? Now, you're arguing it should be neutral, it should be neutral, it should be neutral. But the reality is that possible or not? I think that when me and you grew up, the argument was always make it neutral, make it neutral, make it neutral. But frankly, I think a lot of times underneath the cloak of the guy calling for neutrality, he had a perspective on where he wanted to go. And then as soon as he got in power, he pulled it off and said, it ain't going to be neutral no more. And then he enforced what he wanted to do. So I'm not sure, Ray, you're a smart guy. You're not a foolish guy. Do you really think that people are going to pull up neutral at that point? Or do you think you're always going to end up with somebody that asserts their opinion, their viewpoint, their perspective, their position when they get into the reins of power? And then how do Christians respond if that's the case?
Okay, so that's the reason why Jesus was never mayor, governor, president, emperor, none of that stuff. We represent a kingdom higher than all of that.
My kingdom is not of this world.
Not of this world. So we need to take a position of the royalty that of our eternity assured to us by God the Father. Everybody is of a sinful nature. So with power, the taste of power corrupts 100%. So when they get up there, they're going to promote people who love them or who back them up, who's going to vote for them. So they're going to look out for theirs. That's why, but it is extremely difficult. I'm not saying it's easy, but it is extremely difficult to govern neutrally. But our Constitution, right? God inspired these men to write a constitution to be equal and fair to all men. If we follow that blueprint, this country can be governed a lot better. I think we have strayed away from that framework, from the true inspiration of these men when they gathered, who disagreed with each other. But they discussed, but they headbutted as well, right? That's why we had the Bill of Rights. So, but they came to agreement for fairness of all, right?
But I think part of the challenge is think they all came from a common heritage, from like the same kind of cultural background, and it was Christian. Wasn't even Jewish. I know we talk Judeo-Christian values. No, these were Christian dudes that came over. My point is just this. They were way closer to being on the same page. How do you do that when suddenly you've got competing worldviews and competing? I'm just saying, it's a different story.
I get it. But remember, these men, right? These men having some sort of Christian background, right? Because I don't know them all. I didn't know their faith, right? But they're coming from a Christian background. Even then, they said all men are created equal. Now, they didn't have that insight of what we were going to face today, but God inspired, I believe, them, based on their Christian values, said that all men are created equal. They did not say Christianity will be the religion of the land. They didn't say that. They could have, but they didn't, because they understood the implications of that. That government shouldn't be, we don't have a theocracy. We have a republic.
Now, I'm going to push back a little bit. I think that those guys' perspective was that Christianity was going to be the mainstay of the American people. What they said was there's not going to be a single denomination that becomes the state church. And so that was where they were going to differ from England, because England had the Church of England. And if you didn't agree with the Church of England, you couldn't preach the gospel, you couldn't meet. And so the pilgrims come over to the state so they have freedom of religion.
Right.
But it wasn't a freedom of religion conceived of in that day, I would argue, that was going to bring in Buddhism and Hinduism and Islam and all these different things. But it was a freedom. Let me just finish.
Which all existed when they were alive.
They did, with my point, right? But it was a freedom of religion more within the bounds of Christianity, that no single denomination will be defined as our denominational standard. Mm-hmm. I think that is the right way to look historically. Now, if you want to ask, within that claim, was there a claim of a greater religious freedom that would extend beyond the bounds of Christianity? That's something that you can ask. And I think you mentioned it earlier when we talked about the heart of Christianity, because it does not convert by might, but it wants to convert the heart and the mind, is always seeking to make a case with sharing the gospel and having someone wholeheartedly accept it, rather than using a club to beat them over the head, because that's counter.
There's no jihad in Christianity.
There's not. Right. And this is what's a challenge, because believers don't have that. So they leave the door open to everybody. They're willing to have everybody at the table, but the other folks at the table have a different perspective.
Right.
They might very well come with a different mentality.
Yeah, we see that in Nigeria almost every single day.
An atheist might come and say, hey, let's have a neutral playing field. And then suddenly, once they can get control, kick all the Christians out. And they're happy with that. Whereas the Christians usually really are open to that neutral playing field so that they can make a case for Christ. Sometimes in Muslim thinking, not necessarily the case, but once they reign to the areas of power, they're going to push back more strongly against those who don't believe and maybe excise them from authority. So you do have some fundamental different value sets in Christianity, as you pointed out, because of the nature of the gospel, that you don't necessarily have in other faiths or even non-faiths like secular viewpoints. Now, let me take you to one more place. So we've had a thoughtful, provoking conversation, a little heat on it for fun, as we're throwing the ball around, but the heat doesn't always stay for fun. Sometimes these things are filtered down into society and cause folks to act in ways as they get heated and fired up that are not necessarily good. And so tragically, on the wake of the events that you had with the protest in London for freedom of speech and language between Christian and Muslim, and how do you do it and how do you push back? And then even in our own capital, when they're having a Christian prayer rally and making claims about Christianity over and against other worldviews, in San Diego, California, you've got 2 teenagers that walk into a mosque and take the lives of 3, and it seems would have been happy to take the lives of many more.
Right.
So the rubber meets the road on this. Let's take a look real quick at what went down.
On May 18th, a San Diego neighborhood was hurled into mayhem when 2 suspected teenage gunmen fired shots at San Diego's largest mosque. Kids, staff, and teachers cowered inside as several shots rang out at the San Diego Islamic Center in the city's Claremont neighborhood. Authorities said officers swarmed the Islamic Center within 4 minutes of the first emergency calls, launching what police described as a fast-moving and, quote, dynamic response. By the time cops responded, the 2 teenage gunmen had already killed 3 men, including hero security guard Amin Abdullah. Authorities confirmed Abdullah, a father of 8, played a, quote, pivotal role in holding back the shooters.
One of the deceased is a security guard that works there, and I think played a pivotal role in assisting from this being much worse.
Terrifying aerial video from Fox 5 San Diego captured more than a dozen kids who looked no older than 5 years old, evacuating in a single file as they were guided to safety by law enforcement. Police later found the 2 gunmen, identified by a law enforcement source as 17-year-old Kane Clark and 18-year-old Caleb Velasquez, dead inside a BMW from self-inflicted gunshot wounds only a few blocks from the center. And police are still piecing together why 2 camouflaged teens went on the rampage.
So, Ray, having seen what happened there in San Diego, not all the details on the table yet, more to come.
More to come.
This is a place where all of a sudden, the topic that we're talking about for others meets the road, and you've got bloodshed, you've got hatred, you've got violence. What do we do here?
There's no silver bullet here. There's no one, sentence that would cure all this. There will always be evil. I mean, we didn't get to number 4 in creation where we have the brother kill his brother, right? So we started off from the get-go, right? Our people started from the get-go killing each other.
The firstborn son of Adam and Eve took the second-born son's life, Cain and Abel.
So since then, evil has existed, and there will be evil people who do evil things. So we're always going to have that. So there's no one key solution for this, but it is a problem that we have to deal with. These 2 boys, thankfully the mother had alerted the police that her son had stolen the guns and stole the family vehicle. So the police were already on alert, and they were actively patrolling, searching the area for the car, and hopefully finding the son. Now, obviously, they didn't get to this mosque, and they got there in time, but the 2 young men took their own lives. So we're always going to have that. There's always you could take all the guns in the world, which will never happen. All the guns in the world. What did Cain use to kill Abel? A rock. So you are always going to have that evil living amongst us. It is a fallen world, and we are of sinful nature. So we're never going to settle that issue. That issue will get settled one day, right? When Jesus, the second coming of Christ, and we're living in the city of God. But until then, this is going to happen. This is a complicated issue.
Okay, these boys were 17, 18?
17, 18, I think.
My son, 15 years old.
Yeah.
Right? Very influential
17,
still at this
18.
age. I don't know that I felt could very easily be influenced, right? I don't know that I felt that way when I was 17 or 18. But now that I'm, much more seasoned, 50-something years old, I look back and realize how young I was and how, to a certain degree, not yet fully formed my understanding was.
Right.
And these young people, we're having a conversation right now. They could go to YouTube, pop it up, and listen to it. Hopefully we're somewhat grounded as we're wrestling with this. But these young people go out there and they're bombarded with all kinds of different perspectives. People that get the clicks and it's, whoa, here it comes, can sometimes be even more influential than the ones that are sound-minded. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so these guys can really be shaped. This whole conversation between American culture being torn apart by immigrants, and it's Muslim and Christian, and who knows, we'll find out later, what influenced these young men. But eventually it led them to pick up weapons and become violent.
Right.
It wasn't against a church. It wasn't against a synagogue. It was against a mosque. Right. I heard someone say a little bit earlier today, they're looking into whether this was a hate crime. Well, I know what they mean by that is falls under the legal definitions of a hate crime. But whatever it was filled with hate. There's no way you go to take the lives of others unless there's some significant thoughts in your mind that view them in a negative way, in a hate-filled way, to want to take their very lives, right? And so, Ray, what do we do? I mean, we're in a society when you've got these issues across the pond, hundreds of thousands marching, in Washington, D.C., people praying, claims about Christ, claims about Islam, young people trying to figure out up from down. How do we approach this? Maybe let's go as Christians, and then maybe we can talk as society. How as Christians do we speak into these issues so that if there's a young guy watching, thinking through this, how would you speak about these things?
Yeah. So, and real quick, these 2 young men took their own lives. That's why I brought up the issue of hopelessness, because hopelessness, right, leads to depression, and depression, unfortunately, leads to the taking of your own life, right? So these 2 boys, I think they found themselves hopeless. They didn't see a future for themselves. They didn't see a future where they could live among other people. And people are going to say, well, they killed them so they didn't want to face the law. Well, that's, that may be so at that moment, but we're talking years. These boys did not wake up that day and say, you know what? Let's shoot up a mosque. They didn't wake up that morning and decided that. This is coming from years, right? Adult supervision. A lot of young men nowadays in America grow up without a father, right? Or with a fatherly figure in their lives. So I think that's a big that is a big problem, a challenge in this country. We need parents to be more dedicate more time to supervision. Kids don't own their room. Kids don't own their electronic devices. You bought them for them. Now you have to monitor that. You have to restrict that. Yeah, it's hard, but nobody asked you to have a child. You had the child on your own. Right? However the circumstances may have been, right? And glory be to God that you decided to have that child. But now you have to take responsibility for that child. Young men listening to this, I will hope you have a father figure in your life. But if you don't, look for one. Look for one that has been successful. Look for one that is biblically sound. Not one that carries a cross in a protest, but one that has his Bible open. One that has a worn out Bible with themselves, right? So look for those type of men who can talk about God, who can talk about love in the midst of chaos, because this world is chaos, right? Only God provides peace. So if it's challenging, right? But the problem is when you have people who pick up the banner of Christianity and talk about nuking a country, almost in the very same sentence, we have a problem.
We do.
That's why I say neutrality is needed within governments. Why?
Is neutrality needed in the church?
Not in the church. Of course, not in the church. In the church, right? You need to stand up for Christianity because that's why we are the church.
What kind of Christianity? The big tough kinds that comes with and we're going to protest. That one? What kind?
I don't think Jesus had a gym membership. So, he must have been buff because he was a carpenter. He didn't buy his wood at the Home Depot or at the Lowe's. He had to make his 2x4 from a tree trunk. So Jesus was buff. And he had a couple of roughnecks with him. You know what I'm saying? A lot of them weren't
Thunder.
Just, Sons of Thunder, Peter and Andrew, they were fishermen. They're hauling, 500-pound nets wet into the boat. These weren't chumps. And I hate how Hollywood and people at large have been duped on believing that Jesus was some type of feeble guy. I'm not saying feeble guys cannot stand up for Christ, but what I am saying, Jesus was fit by knowing a little bit about his history, knowing the apostles, some of the apostles' history, because like Bartholomew, what did he do? I mean, we don't know about. But, we talk about Peter, Andrew, the sons of Thunder.
So the question I asked you was, should Christianity be neutral?
No, within the confines of biblical studies, and what I think, within the doors of the Church of God, yes, we call them out, but we got to be biblical literate on all these things to know, yes, we stand up for Christianity, but we stand up in love, because I can do all these things, but without love, everything is in vain.
So what I think you went to the Jesus being fit and not having a gym membership, I think what you were trying to say there was, no, Christianity isn't neutral. It's bold and it leads and it's strong.
Oh, yes.
But it's not the strength of the world that brings a sword or a club.
No.
It's a very different kind of strength.
Jesus held Peter back. He said, put that away.
Those who live by the sword die by the sword.
Yeah. Put it up. And he healed that man.
He did. And his name is mentioned in the gospel, and you wonder if that guy became a believer or not.
He most definitely did.
I would agree with you. Probably so.
The Messiah put his ear back.
Yeah.
First, that soldier from the Sanhedrin, right? Because he was a soldier of the temple, not a Roman soldier.
So let's bring this back. So as we look at the culture where it's at today, as we kind of wrap up, as we look at the culture and where it's at today, and the great confusion and the great lack of understanding,
right.
And what's coming up and out of that is conflict, and anger and violence. And I don't know about you, Ray, but some of the leading voices of Christ, quote unquote, are those who don't know him and making claims in his name, like you say, that are far afield of what he would call it to.
Yeah.
And so you wonder, these young men walking to mosque doing these things, what did they think they were doing? You know, this isn't the love of Christ.
No,
you know,
no.
There's some challenging things that popped up even out of this mosque. I saw, as I mentioned to you earlier on, that there was some associations with this mosque with 9/11 and some of the things years back that happened. Yeah. I'm not saying that was a motivation or even any kind of justification at all. But my point to bring that up in the end is just the complexity even of the event that took place in San Diego.
Yeah.
The complexity of Muslims who use violence. Those who claim to be Christians who use violence, and I should add, those who claim to be Muslims who use violence, those things are all swirling together.
Yeah, and just to touch base on that, the loose nexus to 9/11, the imam, that current imam, right? The current imam's daughter has a social media life, or however you want to call that, right? And she's very anti-Semite, very anti. U.S.
Okay, I don't know about it.
Yeah, I've read up on it. So,
and all that just to say, the complexity here is very big. You know what I mean? And what's going on? And so all the more the need for the gospel, right? And the church to stand up, not remain neutral, not be vigilant in a violent way at all, but to be vigilant for the sake of the gospel. The strength, as you talked about, with the Christ held, not a gym membership per se, but the willingness to step into these situations and proclaim the truth in love. That's not an easy way to walk. Taking your cross up daily and following the Lord is not easy. Ray, you were a campus security guy.
Yeah.
What are your reflections on this, given that you, for several years, as a Bible teacher and the head of campus security at a private Christian school, every day you were out there walking around, protecting the kids, keeping them safe.
Yeah.
Give a little your perspective on this whole thing from that vantage point.
That's an interesting position, because I was a Bible teacher, and the title was director of security. Director of myself.
And you carried a gun.
And I carried a firearm.
To protect the children.
To protect the
And this is K through 12 every day.
And okay, so this is how I dealt with that me personally, right? So what I used to say is I guard the soul and guard like the body, the physical body. How I do that, right? I'm a teaching Bible teacher. Every time I went to campus, I always walked around campus. When I walked around campus, I would say a prayer within me, right? I wouldn't carry around the Bible and, let everybody know I'm praying, right? It's between me and God, right? So I would pray. That was my first line of defense, or first, my armament was my prayer. You know?
That.
And ever since we didn't deal with any issues at all that jeopardized the safety or security of the students while I was there.
By God's grace.
By God's grace. Because my now obviously, right, and we're not here to give a Old Testament survey, but there will be times, right, that you may have to confront. And I was law enforcement for over 25 years, right? So there will be a time, and that's a testimony on its own, right? But there will be a time that you have to meet force with force, because they're violating the law of the land. And I wasn't carrying a gun because I was a cowboy, like, Wild Wild West. No, I was authorized by the government program to carry a firearm on school property. Here in the state of Florida is very restrictive and very, gives you that avenue. So I followed the law, and I did carry a firearm. But my first weapon of defense was my prayer to God.
Yeah.
What's
your thoughts on this particular situation, given that background? I mean, as you see something like this, I can't help but think to yourself, whoa, because you were walking those hallways every day.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we've come to a period of time where even in places of worship, you need to have some security element, right? In this country, in other countries, they rely fully on God. I mean, Nigeria keeps popping up, right? Because how many people get killed in Nigeria just because of their Christian faith? They don't have security out in the front door. They don't have people with machine guns protecting them from bad people with machine guns or machetes, right? So it's within our culture, right, we have the Second Amendment, right, with the right to bear arms. So that's why we're kind of like, we are a heavily armed population. There's more guns in this country than people, right?
Get out of town.
So we are a heavily armed population. So in our culture, we're able to use those firearms for our protection, right? Should you, as a Christian, should you arm yourself and say, oh, I'm going to get somebody today, or hopefully somebody comes at me so I can kill them? That should not be the thought. Your thought should be, God, prevent any use of my firearm, if at all possible. Please. That was my struggle when I was in law enforcement. That's why I didn't get baptized after I was saved for 10 years. Because my struggle was, what if I had to take someone's life? And my pastor at that time said to me, God knows when you're going to have to use that firearm, if you ever going to have to use that firearm. So don't put off your baptism because of your doubts. Rest on the Lord, right? So, and then after 10 years of getting saved, I got baptized because I said, you know what? He's right. I'm going to trust the Lord in all my things, right? So I was finally baptized. So our first line of defense as a Christian is prayer. And fasting. I'm gonna add fasting to that, right? Prayer and fasting. That's our armament as a Christian, not the sword, not the sword.
Police officers say that this security guard very well saved a great many lives by doing what he did and being the first line of defense. Right. Obviously, want to pray for his family, all those lives lost at that event, and that God's hand would be upon all those people and all those communities. It's so heart-wrenching, and it's okay to talk back and forth about the cultural challenges of a country, of a community. It's okay to evaluate the differences between the Christian claims of who Christ is and the Muslim claims of who Allah is and who Muhammad is. It's okay to have those conversations, It's incumbent upon us as people to seek the truth and to try to figure out who God is and how he's revealed him, right? But as you pointed out, at least for believers, picking up arms for the sake of the gospel is not something the Lord's called us to. No, but he's called us to proclaim the good news of the gospel.
Bravado and the weaponization of Christ, it's there is no Christianity jihad. There isn't. We win people over by love, sacrificial love, right?
We're called to carry a cross, not to carry a crossbow, right?
Yeah.
As we seek to see people's hearts and minds changed by the power and work, not of ammunition or our own muscles and might, but by the power and work of the Holy Spirit.
That's right.
Well, Ray, thanks for sitting down with me today and thinking through these tough issues. And we'll join us up here for another edition of CrossCurrent in the near future. All right? All right.
All right.